everyone, welcome to my kitchen. My name is Terry, and today we're going to make salsa. This is a recipe that I got from my friend Mary about 20 or 25 years ago, so I've been making it for a long time. So we're going to get started. I'm going to get my apron on, and I'll show you the steps in making it. The first ingredient you need is tomatoes. Now these were Roma tomatoes from our garden. There might have been a little mix of other ones to make the 5 pounds in as well as the Romas. But I bagged them up in 5-pound bags, and I actually have 3 of these 5-pound bags. These tomatoes were blanched, cooled, and skinned, and then put through the food processor and weighed out at roughly 5 pounds for each bag, which is enough for each batch. I have 3 of them, so I'm actually going to make 3 times the batch. And I have these great big pots. I have 2 of them. I'm going to divide them up into half each, rather than one big, huge pot, which gets a little overwhelming and huge on the stove. So instead, I'm going to use the 2 other smaller pots. And the first thing I'm going to do, now that these have thawed out, one of them must have had a hole because there's an awful lot of liquid left in this bowl. So I'm going to re-weigh them actually, just to make sure I still have 5 pounds in each of the bags. And if not, I will go to the freezer and grab out another couple of bags I had put away in there to make soups. So I could just use those up instead. So we'll get busy weighing those and see what we come out with regards to the 5 pounds. All right, while we're waiting for these tomatoes to thaw out enough to add them to those pots, I'm going to turn this dishwasher on where I have the equivalent of about 30 pints. I've only actually got 3 pint jars, but I've got some that are quarts and some that are 1.5 pint size. So I've got a few extra jars. We'll see how it goes just in case. But I'm going to turn that dishwasher on now to get those jars clean before I put them in the oven and sterilize them before I'm going to use them. Another thing I can get busy doing is chopping up all these onions. I need to add 5 onions for every batch of the salsa that goes with 5 pounds of tomatoes and 5 onions. So I need 15 onions. These are very large onions from Costco, so I might not need quite as many, but I can get busy cutting them up and grinding them into large chunks to add to these pots while I'm waiting for these tomatoes to thaw out. Wow, these are large onions and powerful. My eyes are already watering. I think they're so big that actually instead of 5 onions, probably 4 would be enough. So that would be 12. So I'll just carry on with this, cutting them up like this, and I think my old grinder doesn't work that great. I might just put them through the food processor since I have to get it out to do those tomatoes anyways. So it'll already need cleaning from that, so I might as well use that for these onions as well. Pretty much everything else, as it's been taken from the garden, the peppers and the garlic and the jalapenos, I've already ground them up and everything and frozen them ground up so that it makes it quicker when I go to do this salsa. But I'll show you that as we progress. Right now I need to get a Kleenex for my eyes because I can't see. Well, okay. Cleans up the sinuses, those onions. I know I could do them underwater, and you all have tricks of how to do them so that you don't get all watery eyes, but you know what? Just bite the bullet and go for it. Anyways, I've got half of them cleaned. Allan's actually gotten out the new food processor. We have that old one that we've been using faithfully that we thought was on its last legs, but it keeps on going. But he thinks that we should probably try to learn how to use the new one. So that's what we're going to do. In a few minutes, we're going to move over there and we'll see if it works. Hopefully it does. And we know what we're doing. He got out the book for the instructions, so we'll see. All right, here we are with this fancy-dancy new Cuisinart food processor, and we're going to try doing these onions in there. So we'll see how that goes, and we'll let you know in a minute. Well, scrap that. That's not the consistency I want for these onions at all. We're going to go back to the hand grinder. Hopefully that will work better. It always has in the past, though my old one's kind of wrecky, so he's going to try this new one he found. So we'll see how the hand grinder works. All right then, Allan's having great success using the old hand grinder for those onions, and they're coming out the size that I really want them to be. And now, while he's doing that, I'm going to finish chopping up these tomatoes and use this new Cuisinart and see how it works with tomatoes. All right, those tomatoes pureed down not too badly in this Cuisinart food processor. Now I'm just going to measure out another 2.5 pounds to go into that second pot. So they're both at 7.5 pounds. And Allan's busy grinding up the second batch of onions for that other pot, and then we'll just do a couple of more for each pot, and we'll be all done with the onions in there, and then we can move on after that. Okay, let's get busy and measure this out and weigh the 2.5 pounds. Well, as I'm in the middle of cleaning up this mess I just made, thought I'll show you what not to do. In this bowl, I had poured off some of the liquid from those extra tomatoes, intending to use it as tomato juice to drink, but I accidentally hit it and spilt it all over the floor. And this is what is left of the mess, because I've already cleaned most of it up. But as you can see, it was quite the disaster. But Allan, being the trooper he is, he just kept going, continuing along with his grinding the onions and chuckling at my mess. Anyway, I am working on that, cleaning that up and finishing grinding up the rest of these tomatoes. Okay, we're moving on from that little disaster, and now I have these last 4 onions to cut up and divide between the 2 pots. So Allan's taking a little break while I get those ready, and once we're finished that, we can start adding the other ingredients. I want you to keep in mind that to remember that each batch did call for the 5 pounds of the tomatoes and 5 onions, but because these onions were so huge, I'm only adding 4 onions. I mean, I could probably add, there's only 2 left in the bag, actually. Went through just about the whole works. Probably wouldn't hurt to just add them all, but we'll see after we finish with this. I decided those are plenty enough onions once I get these ground up, so I'm not going to add these last 2. Allan says I'm chicken, but no, I'll just save them for cooking with other things. All right, the next thing that this recipe calls for is 2 green peppers, and I happen to have 6 of them already ground up that had been frozen from our garden. So I'm going to divide those in half because, of course, I got 2 pots with 1.5 times the recipe in each one, and they weigh 725. So I'm going to divide it into about 360 grams for each pot. Okay. This recipe also calls for 7 to 20 jalapeno peppers. Now that's quite a big span. I had 20 of them already ground up and frozen in the freezer. I also have more of them here that I've just picked recently off of our bushes outside our plants. It also calls for 2 red peppers. I don't have any red peppers that I want to use up right now, but I have a whole bunch of these orange and yellow ones from the freezer, so I'm just going to rinse them under some warm water and get Allan to grind them up. As long as I have about the equivalent of what I needed in red peppers. You can't hardly see the red peppers anyways with all the tomatoes, so you might as well just use the orange or the yellow. So we'll get busy and do that. I'll divide up these jalapenos into between the 2 pots. I've also got a bit of a green pepper from the garden here. So we'll add all that and then move on. Okay. Also calls for 6 cloves of garlic. I have 22 of them ground up in here that were frozen in the freezer. It's handy to do all that ahead and have it ground up. Makes a little less work. So here we go. 22 of those, 195. Just about 200. So we're just going to do half into each one. And Allan's grinding up all the rest of those peppers. He's divided them all out, and half into one and half into the other. That's good. Okay, change of plans. All those peppers are in, and we were going to use a bunch of these jalapenos that were just from the garden, but you know we're going to save them or give them away to people, whatever. I do have the seeds from the other ones that went in there, and they're what make it so hot. And that's plenty enough jalapenos. If I was going to start doing those, my eyes are going to start stinging. Wear gloves when you're grinding up those jalapenos because your hands burn. And later on that night, even the next day, you go to touch your face and it burns. So you make sure you wear rubber gloves when you're working with jalapenos. And I'm just going to get busy and start adding the pickling salt and the vinegars to this, and we'll see how it tastes, depending how hot it is already with just those jalapeno skins and not the seeds. We'll see if we need to add some of the seeds to it. So I'll get busy and start adding the other ingredients. So it calls in this recipe for 1/8 of a cup of the coarse pickling salt. Now, 1/8 of a cup. There's 8 ounces in a cup. There's 16 tablespoons. So that 1/8 will be 2 tablespoons. And since I'm making 1 1/2 in each pot, that will be 3 tablespoons of the pickling salt. Calls for 1/2 cup of vinegar. I use the Heinz pickling vinegar. So because it's 1 1/2 times, I'm putting in 3/4 of a cup of vinegar into each pot. Go with the vinegar. Next, we're going to move on to the sugar. Calls for 1/4 of a cup of white sugar, so I'll do 1 1/2 times that. Okay, so I'm going to end up measuring out this sugar. I could do 1/4 of a cup. 1/4 of a cup is 4 tablespoons, and I need half that much again, so it's another 2 tablespoons. So I need 6 tablespoons. So I will do 1/4 of a cup plus 2 tablespoons into each of these pots. There's 1/4. And 2 tablespoons. There. And I'll do the same into the other pot. All right, we have everything in the pots, except we're gonna simmer them both for about an hour, see how much they thicken up, and to cook the onions and some of the peppers that were fresh. And after that, we'll see how thick it is. And then I have tomato paste that I purchased to thicken it up to have what the thickness that we'd like it. But I'd like to recap right now the actual basic salsa recipe for everyone. So here we go. 5 pounds of tomatoes that have been blanched, skinned, and put through the food processor or mashed. You could chop them up and mash them if you don't have a food processor. 5 medium onions, ground coarsely or chopped up. You could chop them up by hand if you don't have a grinder. Also, 2 green peppers and 2 red peppers. Again, either ground up coarsely or chopped into little chunks. 7 to 20 of the jalapeno peppers. You can do a mix of green and red. I like to grind them up so that they're really finely ground. 6 cloves of garlic, again, ground up fine. And then it calls, when you want to put in the tomato paste later, it calls for 4 to 5 small cans of the tomato paste. I have the bigger cans, so I put in 2 or 3. I'm hoping that 3 in each one of these will be enough. Calls for 1/2 cup of vinegar. I used the pickling vinegar. 1/4 of a cup of white sugar. 1/8 of a cup of the coarse pickling salt. And then if you'd like hotter salsa, you can either add the cayenne pepper, or I have all of these seeds from out of the jalapeno peppers that I will be testing later and adding a few to make them hotter. So that's it for right now. We're gonna let this simmer for an hour and we'll be back and see how it's doing. All right, these have now been simmering for an hour. That one and this one. Okay. Now I'm going to add 1 can, possibly 2 cans each, to each pot of this no-name brand tomato paste from Superstore, actually. I've added 2 cans of the tomato paste, actually, to each pot. And we'll just see how it thickens up. Probably let it simmer for another hour or maybe 30 minutes. And then I'll try it. We like a stiff salsa. Well, not standing up the wooden spoon, so we'll see how it goes. Let it simmer for a while, see if it'll thicken up. And I do have another can of the tomato paste to add to each one of these if we need it. All right, Allan's upstairs. He's got the canner all set up down there in the garage. We would have done it on the deck, which is covered, but it is pouring rain and the garage is enclosed with the doors, so it'll be a little bit warmer and nicer in the garage. We've just done a taste test of these two, and even though I think it's hot enough, Allan thinks I should add some of the hot pepper seeds from the jalapenos, but I beg to differ, because then you bite into those and it's really hot. So instead, I'm going to compromise with him, and we're going to add a teaspoon of the organic cayenne pepper to each pot instead and see how that ends up. Okay, I put a teaspoon of each into each one of these pots. Allan wants a tablespoon. I'm going to hide the cayenne so he doesn't add more, keeping in mind that we have all these little grandchildren who don't particularly like this salsa really hot. This one, isn't it interesting that it's a runnier on top that it settles? And I measured them so carefully, but I have to mix them together to make it all the same consistency. But we'll see how it goes in another half an hour or so. Okay, one more taste test down, and we had another compromise. I added one more teaspoon of the cayenne pepper to each of these. So that's it. No more hotness. We're done. Now we're just going to let these simmer for about an hour. And then if the other one's still a little bit more runny than this one, seems to settle. Interesting. What we will do is I'll put them together, and so they'll both be the same. Mellow it out. One's thicker, one's runnier. They'll both be medium. Okay, so we'll let that simmer. All right, as it turned out, we ended up dumping the other pot full into this one, and I thought they were the same size. I didn't think this would have, I thought it would be too much for the other one, but apparently that other one fit everything into here, and it's great. It's just about the consistency we'd like, but I do have the 7th can of this tomato paste. So I'm going to add that, and then we're going to cook it for about another half an hour, and then we're going to go ahead and can it. In the meantime, the jars are in the oven, and I'm going to turn them on when I'm getting ready to use them, so they'll be hot and sterilized. And I have my Bernardin lids, and I will put them in some water and heat them, because I like to have the rubber a little bit soft. They say you don't have to do that, I know, but I do it anyways. So, okay, so I'll just keep stirring this, and I'm going to add that can of tomato paste, and we'll be back when all that's ready. There we go. Lucky can 7. That's got to be it. Nearly ready to start filling these jars. The salsa's still there hot on the stove. The lids are being heated up. I always put them one up, one down, one up, one down, so that they're easier to grab out. Got a filling cup and a plate and the funnel, and all the jars are in the oven where they're getting nice and heated and sterilized. And we'll just wait a few minutes until those are all up to speed, and we'll start loading those jars. All right, here we go. Taking these hot jars out, 7 of them, to go into this canner over here that Allan's going to carry them down in. The salsa is bubbling, the lids are heated, and we're going to get busy and get those going. All right. See, not quite enough. Let's see where it's going to be. sweltering hot. Sorry. Allan, don't laugh. I should be wearing protective gear. Right to the bottom of that ring. Not bad. Just continue there and we'll show you when we put the lids on. Okay, I just like them to be filled just to the bottom of this band right here. That's those first 7. And now, just quick little wipe off the top. Those good. And I have a fork here. Put the lids on quickly. Okay, repeat. Okay, now the bands. I'm gonna have them spinning freely. Hand tight. Like that. Freely, make sure there's no obstructions. Hand tight. Tight. Okay, now, oops, that's interesting. Look at that. It keeps popping around. Doesn't tighten. Something wrong with the band? Or the jar itself. Interesting. No, that one went fine. It's the band. Now that was an interesting thing to note. Put that one aside and try it on a few others. Now Allan's going to carry these down to the canner in the garage. Again, here we go. More jars out of the oven. They're hot jars. And I'll just continue with that and we'll see how many we get in this canner when we're using 1.5 pints jars instead of the quart, which are 2 pints. So we'll see. Okay. 2 things to note here. Remember this lid? I tried it on another jar. After that, same thing. It just kept going round and round. And you know, it's a brand new lid. So whatever was designed wrong in there, something manufactured, doesn't tighten up. And the other thing, when I was filling those last jars, this one, when I dumped the salsa into it, had a funny sound when it hit the bottom. Wasn't a ping, I didn't think, but it was very suspicious. And so I went, you know what? I dumped all the salsa into another jar and I discovered that it had cracked across the bottom, which shouldn't have happened. Hot salsa, hot jars, it shouldn't, it's not like it was cold. And look, it's cracked right up and around through here too. So interesting. That would have been a disaster if I hadn't heard that little sound we would have had a real disaster in that canner when we opened it up later. Anyways, I'm going to carry on and finish filling the rest of these jars. Here we are, loading up this canner. Allan's very carefully loading them in there. He already has one layer on the bottom. Do another layer on the top. That should be good. It's supposed to hold 20 quarts, 10 and 10, but you know, that's American quartz we've discovered. And doesn't quite, so we'll just carry on with that. All right, we're locked and loaded. Now we'll just tie it down. Balanced side to side. Great. Here we go. All right, it's all tightened down evenly all around. And now it needs to steam and vent for 7 to 10 minutes. When it gets up to that pressure and the steam starts coming out that little vent. Okay, the canner has vented for 7 to 10 minutes. Allan's put this new fancy dancy little gauge on the top that keeps it at 10 pounds, something we just discovered in the last couple of years. And it's just at 10 pounds, a little bit over there. So he's turned it down. So now it'll go for 20 minutes. Well, here we are the next morning. These jars have now been unloaded from the canner last night. Fortunately, my phone was out of battery and plugged in, so I didn't record that, but they were put here on top of the freezer on this board to cool off overnight, and now I'm just going to label them. All labeled. All right. Ended up getting about 31 pints, equivalent to, that's a pint size. That's a 1.5 pint size, and the ones here on this end are a quart size, which is 2 pints. So if you add them all together and what I have left over in the fridge upstairs, it's about 31 pints. And each batch is supposed to make 10 to 11 pints, so that's right, 3 times. The amount that I made is 31. So that's it. I'll say goodbye to everybody now. I'll start packing these away in the canning cupboard, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas. If I don't see you before, it is the middle of November. Or Happy Thanksgiving to you people in the States. And hoping you all stay healthy and safe. Okay? Bye-bye.